It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing SD Gundam Gaiden, Lacroan Heroes, Nobunaga's Ambition, Astro Rabby, Palamedes, and Poppin' TwinBee. Let's start the show. SD Gundam Gaiden, Lacroan Heroes, DMG-LHJ. Developed by Human Entertainment and published by Bandai. About ready to tap out as I was with these frankly bloody awful manga tie-ins, I came across a title of two halves. SD Gundam Gaiden sent the chilliest of chills down my spine, and I considered deleting it from the list and feigning ignorance of its existence. However, the second part sparked a momentary memory in the back of my mind. From somewhere, I know the words Lacroan Heroes. I had to find out more. Blessedly, this game is nothing like its predecessor. Lacroan Heroes is an RPG, but with mechs instead of humans or elves or whatever. An intriguing concept for sure, and one that isn't particularly normal even by today's standards. You could argue that games like Nier Automata or Xenogears has elements of this, but in 1990 there was a real opportunity to strike out from the already established tropes and craft something truly unique. Unfortunately, rather than create an original story, all we find here is a bog-standard Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy Legend clone with robots instead of people. The people don't pilot the robots, as in every iteration of Gundam. No, the robots are the people. So all you get is a reskinned version of a game we've seen a million times before. The game is not balanced at all well. Its cliched yet still somehow minuscule story is padded out with one of the most obnoxious grinding mechanics you could imagine. You'll die a lot at level 1, not even being able to handle 2 monsters at a time. Even fighting one-on-one will leave you needing to retreat to an inn after virtually every battle. And that's the bonkers thing. You're not even fighting other robots. You'll still get the bats, the slime balls, the goblins, in a fantasy world no less. All the same old shit done better by so many other games. So not only was the Gundam IP shoehorned into a fantasy RPG, it wasn't even done to completion. Skip through the intro screen and you wouldn't even know you were playing a Gundam title. There are 1 or 2 passing references to the franchise, but other than that, this could be any of 1,000 other generic 8-bit RPG games. So, tap out I did. Sure, it looks decent enough, but I'm not struggling through the translation of a game that is so uninspired and laughably ripped off. If the developers and marketers behind Lacroan Heroes are allowed to be this lazy, then, goddammit, so am I. Nope, nothing exciting as I had hoped. Evidently I know the words Lacroan Heroes only from spending far too much time and money buying horrible Game Boy games, and nothing more. As far as Gundam games are concerned, I sigh and bow my head with the realization there is yet 2 still to go.
Pokemon ゲームの最新作は6対6の大バトル。たくさんのポケモンや武将と出会い、絆を深めて共に戦え。戦に勝って全ての城を君の手に。いざ新たなポケモンの世界へ。ポケモンプラス信長の野望。
Nobunaga's Ambition, DMG-NY, developed and published by Koei. Oh, I do so like a good history lesson. Penned as a history simulation game, Nobunaga's Ambition is set in 1500 Sengoku-era feudal Japan. Literally the age of civil war, it's not necessarily a period that students of the Tudors and the Romans may be aware of, but a fascinating one it certainly is. Nobunaga was a powerful daimyo, a sort of noble or lord, whose ambition was to unite the whole of Japan towards the end of this feudal period of Japanese history. Up until this point, the Emperor of Japan was little more than a ceremonial leader, with the land being broken up into warring shogunates, not dissimilar to Saxon Age Britain or the city-states of early modern Italy. It's not my job to attempt to sum up large swathes of human history in one paragraph, though. I encourage you to read up on it yourself. In the game, you control a daimyo of your choice to try to unite the whole of Japan under one rule: yours. This is done by allocating resources adequately to raise your military force, while also maintaining a productive economy by protecting the people. The game takes place in a turn-based manner, with each turn in the map view corresponding to a season in-game, and each turn in battle corresponding to a day. Keeping a successful state is only a part of the task, of course. Once your military force is strong enough, you're going to want to be aggressive to your neighbours. It's no good waiting for them to peter themselves out, because it won't happen. If you want to unite Japan, you're going to have to do it by force. In battle, you can defeat the enemy in a number of ways: straight up destruction of their armies, forcing a retreat, or outlasting them. When not in battle, you can send your samurai, a kind of second in command, into other fiefdoms to scout or spy. You can steal resources or even peasants from other daimyo, expand your cities, or even create non-aggression pacts and inter-regional marriages between states. There's a hell of a lot going on, and without the manual, you're going to be very confused. At the end of the day, though, it's a conquer-all ambition Nobunaga had, so if in doubt, train your armies up. If you treat your land and its people as a soldier factory, the game becomes more winnable. The biggest stumbling block that the Game Boy version has is its inaccessible navigation. Knowing how to interpret the assortment of letters and numbers on the screen is a challenge in and of itself. Clearly, this suffers from the kanji to English translation squeeze that we've seen before. If you thought the main operation screen was complex, wait until a battle is initiated. You have a plethora of options at your disposal: how many soldiers to send and how much food to give them, how many of your samurai to lead them, and which legions they command. And then it's on to the most confusing game of chess you ever played. The battlefield is laid out in a hexagonal grid, meaning you can move your soldiers to any one of 6 adjacent tiles. If opposing forces are adjacent to each other, they can battle or flee, or attempt to bribe each other. What makes this really confusing at first is differentiating between your and your enemy's forces. The symbols representing both armies, and their various cavalry, rifles and so on, are identical, aside from the fact that one side faces the left-hand side of the screen and the other faces right. If you do manage to work out which characters are yours to maneuver, there's so much flicking between options and menus that it can be a damn challenge to know what you're even doing with them. The music in the game is well composed and has a solid RPG feel to it. It doesn't get irritating, which can only be a good thing. Graphically, it's a little cramped, although seeing as there are few moving parts, it's never blurry, and as you'll be taking your sweet time doing anything in Nobunaga's ambition, this shouldn't be a problem. This is a very thoroughly thought out game, but like old tabletops such as Dungeons & Dragons, it's almost inaccessible to new players. It should definitely not be your first game of this genre. Get something like the brilliant Advance Wars for Game Boy Advance, or one of the multitudes of great turn-based strategy games available on the DS such as Locke's Quest. These have in-game tutorials for a few levels, where some wizard or otherwise know-it-all guides you through the first few stages. This one has none of that. If you're going to buy Nobunaga's Ambition, and if you're a strategy game aficionado, I wouldn't recommend against it by any means. Make sure it has the manual with it, and learn it off by heart, because else you're going to be looking at that thing more than you're looking at your Game Boy. Astro Rabby DMG-ARA, developed by Cyclone System and published by IGS. The Dortoise troops have stolen your power-up parts. You play as Astro Rabby, a space rabbit rather than a Jewish astronaut, whose creator Doc wishes for nothing other than you to soar freely in the sky. So, Rabby has to traverse outer space looking for these special parts. A Japanese exclusive, Astro Rabby has a certain uniqueness to it. The levels are seen from a pseudo 3D top-down perspective, where jumping has the illusion of making your character jump out of the screen instead of upwards. At first, your character only jumps a little bit, but the height and length can be upgraded. Throughout the stages are these question mark blocks that look exactly like the ones out of Mario, except this time you're not jumping up from underneath, you need to jump on them. Doing so will reveal one of a few things, which can then be jumped on again to collect the various effects. Landing on one a second time removes the block, however, leaving a pitfall that sends Rabby drifting off into the great unknown. The reason this is important is because these levels are cyclical, repeating themselves until you find the special part in one of the question blocks. You better get used to how far you can jump, as pre-planning and methodical routing is necessary to search as many of the blocks as possible. Of course, you could find the power-up piece, in the shape of a heart, in the first one you look in. That's the luck of RNG. However, some of these levels have a lot of blocks to open. The other effects you can find don't always help either. Sure, there are exclamation points which give bonuses, and time extensions. I should remark on the stringent time limit here. But later on you'll find a lot of skulls, which, if you land on them a second time, decrease your score. Running out of blocks is a real pain, and this will happen with only a couple of circuits. There's also a small scattering of enemies that you can shoot, but I probably wouldn't focus too much on that until later on, as it really isn't a large facet at first. Whereas on the latter stages, you can shoot these enemies that grow out of the ground in order to get some jump and weapon upgrades. The game looks pretty nice, actually. The jumping animation of your sprite is effective in giving the game depth, and this is one of the few Game Boy games set in space that I can think of that actually has blackness as the space. Often this was avoided due to the excessive blurring. The music is too repetitive for my tastes though, and doesn't really match the spacey atmosphere. After 2 successful scrolling levels, there'll be a still level where you have a load of blocks that all produce a particular tone when jumped on. There are pairs of tones, and the aim is to bounce from one tone to its partner, eliminating all pairs in a match-up fashion. You don't lose anything for just letting the level play out, but the bonuses are nice. Overall, Astro Rabby is accessible, if a tad repetitious, and looks great. I'd give it a go if you're after something that is unusual within Japan, virtually unknown without. You should be able to get to the ending, but if not, I'll detail it for you. I'm not spoiling anything, really. There's no final encounter or anything, rather merely a text screen that says, word for word, "At last, Rabby could take all of the power-up parts back from the Tortoise troops. Luckily, his efforts in the battle could make himself fly power-up parts." Then, Rabby and the Doc are reunited. A somewhat baffling little title. Palamedes DMG-PX, developed by Natsu System and published by Hot B in Japan and Takara in Europe. I wonder who thought Palamedes was a niche waiting to be filled. In the category of "do we really need this" is another attempt at a Tetris-style falling block puzzle game. Where Quoth and Dr. Mario are examples of how to do it pretty well, this is anything but. Also released on consoles and as an arcade game around the same time, this version of Palamedes is probably closest to the Famicom one. It's a simple concept in which you have a die in your hand, and there are other dice descending from the top of the screen, which stack up and get closer to you. Reach you, and that's it. You've seen these sorts of games before, but the gimmick here is that you need to match the number on the dice to eliminate them. Pressing the B button cycles through the numbers 1 to 6, and pressing A shoots the die. The difficulty lies in the rate of progression of those other dice. They come at you so quickly that quite often you can't cycle through to the desired number quickly enough, and because to go from, say, a 6 to a 5, you need to press the button 6 times, it's easy to overshoot and have to go round again. There is, to help you, a row of dice underneath the one that you're playing. When you clear out a pair, you're given a die of that number. If you manage to accumulate more than one of the same number, you can automatically clear out some rows by pressing the down arrow. This helps for a few seconds, but it's really hard to do intentionally as the game is so quick. Stopping even for a split second is a big no-no. You need to use the dice in your hand all the time, so just keep jamming down if it's getting intense. Well, it's intense right from the start. because you don't lose anything if you have no hand to play. Basically, go off instinct, don't think at all. It's the silly pace at which the game moves that makes any sort of strategy attempt pointless. There's no way you can look at your die or your hand, then at the board, then make a decision, and then cycle through the numbers in time. Do all that, and you're pretty much at the point where it's game over anyway. A difficulty curve would not have been too hard to program. Look at how Tetris or Dr. Mario start slowly and build up speed. Is that too much to ask? The game suffers too from an inhibitive shading on the dice, which can really hinder your gameplay. Games like this obviously benefit from having a colour scheme. I can't help but feel the devs could have done something more to help you quickly identify what block you're playing with. Some pips on a die face are not easy enough to distinguish. Some sort of pattern or shape would have been better. The game also would have benefited from better sound. The music is kind of irritating. You know what? All aspects of the game are just slightly on the wrong side of okay, and this makes Palamedes wholly unappealing. I shouldn't bother if I were you.
Comical shooting. Super Famicom ならポップンツインビーがいいんだビ
ー。Pop and TwinBee DMG-TD, developed and published by Konami. Sometimes publishers really missed the mark when it came to releasing games in different regions. Nowadays, we take for granted that games will be given worldwide release. It's just a matter of what consoles they're on. Historically, console exclusivity was much more prevalent, largely because of Nintendo's questionable ethics and ruthless business models, but this led to vastly more varied libraries to go alongside the equally varied technologies. Today's top-end video game machines are basically indistinguishable from one another, to the point where it's like deciding between different brands of mineral water. They have identical capabilities and almost identical libraries. You might gather that I'm no lover of the modern video game scene, but one thing that it does have going for it is availability. It's pretty much a guarantee that a game will be released in your region. This was not the case in the 90s. Pop and TwinBee, or TwinBee Da as it was called in Japan, is a title that fell foul to this. Originally put out in Japan in 1990, and not released anywhere else until 1994, and then only in Europe, we have a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up by the creators of the glorious Gradius series. Konami has an excellent pedigree for shoot-'em-ups, as we know. The game is not based on Parodius as I originally thought. Rather, Parodius is kind of like a cross between a TwinBee game and a Gradius game. In fact, TwinBee is a series going back to the arcades of 1985 that didn't really show its face in North America. It turns out that in 1993, a title called Pop and TwinBee was released in Japan and Europe for the SNES/Super Famicom. And so, to tie in with this, Konami decided to rename this little gem and release it on Game Boy in Europe. As a Konami shoot-'em-up, it's got a lot to live up to, but it does stand up on its own and is by no means a carbon copy of Gradius. You have a kind of life bar where your ship is flanked by a little circle on either side. If you get hit on the right side, you'll lose the little circle on that side, but not die. Get hit again on that side and you'll explode, but the left side can still take a hit. These don't help you if you come into contact with an enemy, you just die straight away, but this is a neat modification on the shield mechanism found in other games, and you get it from the start. The circles are also replenishable by collecting medikits. I find this really helpful because there is a surprisingly high level of projectiles on screen at times, more than you'd imagine the Game Boy could handle. What's really impressive is that there is virtually no sprite flicker at all, and no discernible slowdown. Konami used the alternate frame overlay technique to effectively double the number of visible sprites. Your shields and bullets all flicker like this, but seeing as how the Game Boy runs at 60 FPS, it appears as being partially translucent, but definitely visible. What this did was give the programmers license to throw all manner of stuff at you, meaning those couple of hits you can take are invaluable. Having said that, the game doesn't cheat you that much. Occasionally you'll get blindsided by a swarm of enemies coming from one side of the screen, but as long as you don't hug the edges too much, you should be fine. If you've ever played Parodius, you'll be familiar with the giant bells that fly towards you sometimes. Juggling them with your bullets causes them to change colour, giving different bonuses. Well, this is where they come from. Here you'll often be presented with clouds, bubbles, or some such thing that, if you shoot them, a bell comes out and hurtles towards you. You can shoot at them and they rebound away. They give more points the more you collect without missing one, up to 10,000 points a time, and they're worth getting because you get an extra life every 100,000 points. What's really handy with these, though, is the occasional power-ups they drop. The idea is that you shoot the bells until they change colour, at least that's what you do in colorized versions, such as the one found on Konami GB Collection Volume 3. It's harder to see on the original Game Boy version, but you can just about make out a different shading. The upgrades are necessary too, as the basic weapon is pretty weak and there are no missiles or laser upgrades. You first get a double shot and then a triple. There is a kind of option pickup whereby two ghosts of your craft mimic your movements and shots. Another cool pickup is this basketball thing that flies around the screen, smashing everything it hits. Many enemies are stationary on the ground. Turrets, skulls, hands, and all manner of weird things in that cute-em-up style that Konami did so well, and you can hit these by dropping bombs with the A button. You don't have to be too accurate, simply being close enough is enough for the game to auto-target them, and they always drop points, and occasionally a star that wipes out the whole screen. These seem to come about at the most frantic times, so even if you're swamped in a dogfight, try to hit those ground targets too. Like I say, aiming is not paramount, so it's certainly worth it. The graphics are cute and funny, which you would expect, and the amount of stuff they managed to put on screen is astounding. If you're overwhelmed, it's because there's so much going on, not because the system couldn't handle it. The music is as memorable as some of Konami's other timeless shoot-em-ups. We came to expect some stunning soundtracks from Konami, and this audible offering is right up there. The boss music is a stark contrast to the cheerfulness of the levels, and oh man, that explosion sound. The bosses themselves are not that hard, but they look great. Just before the final boss, you have a boss rush of 5 different mini-bosses, who happen to be bosses from older TwinBee arcade games, whose attack patterns are quite varied. Individually, these are not so tough. They don't have as much health as the main game bosses, but even so, tackling 5 in a row is no mean feat. Then you go through a door labelled with the kanji for Origin, and you're onto the main boss, who has its own level and some funny dialogue beforehand. I dare you to fell Cyber Popo. I don't know. So, although the European release was a bit of a cash-in on the SNES version, Pop and TwinBee for the Game Boy is an excellent title that we can be grateful to have. It's such a shame it took so long to be released anywhere outside Japan. Even more so that North America missed out altogether. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/Portable Power Podcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.